Hello, YouTube. Mahadeva, the Thunder Wizard, aka Michael William Denney. All right, so this is the continuation of me reading from my book, Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, and this is part 2. So last time, and I'm going to be reading directly from the text, and then when I feel motivated to stop and analyze or editorialize or share information, I will. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm wearing blue in honor of Odin. I don't know where I've picked that up, but blue is his color. Yeah, so we're just going to get on with it. All right, so let's see. Last time we read up to the 4th chapter, 5th chapter if you include the introduction. So now let's get to the next chapter, which is traditional blood sacrifice versus Christian sacrifice. So basically, just to recap, the first 4 chapters I talk about my experience. The title, Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, sounds a little childish, but it was the best title I could come up with to share, not that this was necessarily my opinion, but this was what was conveyed to me in a shamanic dream state where I believe I was communicating with Odin after asking him about his sacrifice on the world tree and the similarity between Jesus' sacrifice and his sacrifice, to which I heard a booming voice say, I heard a booming voice respond to my question saying, Jesus was a coward. And then went into a long diatribe, if you will, of why he felt that way. Now, I just got the question, and I get this all the time, because I go into the rest of this book to talk from a historical perspective about the fact that, where the Abrahamic religions came from, and that Jesus never physically existed. We'll get into that. So a lot of people get upset and they say, well, if Jesus never existed, then how is it that Odin calls him a coward? I mean, Odin obviously thinks he exists, and there's a difference between literal historical truth and energetic spiritual realities. We in the West have a problem with that because of Christianity. Christianity is a literalist, dualist religion. It is the first time, in fact, starting with the Old Testament, the Torah. When that was first introduced in the world, I think I'm sure I'll have the date in here, but I think it was 350 BC or something like that. Before that time, there was no such thing as a literal historical religion. There was no religious text that says so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that, and also being presented as actual historical, literal truth. That's never been the case. Every religion has always been mythological, which means that it doesn't necessarily have to be true. So how is it that Odin says Jesus was a coward, and yet I'm going to make the argument that Jesus never existed on a historical level? Because Odin is a deity, and Odin is not a literal deity. Now, I know some people want to talk about, some man named Odin, and, the way I present it in here is that he presents himself as a human that achieved awareness, but he's a deity. So he doesn't have to follow any rules of did he exist and where did he live or any of that stuff. And so from his perspective, Jesus is real because, as I've said before, Jesus is a real deity, but he wasn't a real person. That's not a problem unless your entire scripture presents him as a literal person. And I talk about this, that Christianity backs itself into a corner because the whole purpose of Christianity is to destroy the legitimacy of any other religion. And by saying Jesus was real, all of these are mythological fake beings. But From an energy perspective, deities can be created as a result of the continued prayers and projection of humans. It's like we're projecting for millions of people for hundreds or thousands of years. We can project a deity and have it exist out there. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a deity that you want to worship or a deity that may be helpful for you. I don't make the argument here in this book, but I make the argument now that Jehovah is a real deity, but he is nothing more than human narcissism. So you're worshiping your own narcissism. And Jesus, one could make the argument that Jesus is the projection of our unconscious victim mentality. So it exists, and you can have an interaction, you can speak with it and see visions of it. Doesn't necessarily mean that it really existed or that it is something that is, came from the cosmos, but something we invented. Anyway, that's a much longer topic, and I don't have all the answers to that. But let's get into it. So hopefully some people have shown up now, so let's get started. So this is me reading my book, Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward. We're starting with the chapter called Traditional Blood Sacrifice versus Christian Sacrifice. All right, so I got to scroll on my PDF to page 33, which may be different if you're following along in the book, depending if you have a printed version or whatever, maybe a totally different page. But it's that. Wait, is that it? Did I just pass it? No. That's blood sacrifice, and now we get to page 33. Traditional blood sacrifice versus Christian sacrifice. Okay. Here I go. So, to better understand the dynamics of the blood sacrifice of Jesus as presented in the New Testament, we need to take a closer look at how this sacrifice was supposed to achieve man's salvation in the biblical narrative. Traditional animist sacrifice. The traditional blood sacrifice consisted of humans offering something of personal value to the gods in order to gain favor, spiritual power, and accomplish a practical survival task. Monotheist sacrifice of Jesus. The sacrifice of Jesus is said to be the Almighty Jehovah sacrificing his Son to himself in order to gain human adoration and simultaneously secure their salvation from the punishment of their sinful nature, of which they were powerless to avoid. All right? Let me read those two again. Traditional animist sacrifice. The traditional blood sacrifice consisted of humans offering something of personal value to the gods in order to gain favor, spiritual power, and accomplish a practical survival task. Versus the monotheist sacrifice of Jesus. The sacrifice of Jesus is said to be the Almighty Jehovah sacrificing his Son to himself in order to gain human adoration and simultaneously secure their salvation from the punishment of their sinful nature, of which they were powerless to avoid. Does that confuse you? That's my whole point. First one is very simple. You sacrifice something, you give it to the gods give something back to you. The sacrifice of Jesus is meant to mimic that. If you've read the New Testament, if you went to church, they'll talk about that, the lamb sacrificed for sins, blah, blah, blah. Jesus is the sacrifice. But the thing is that humans aren't operating, this is me talking now, I'm not talking from the text here. This isn't humans taking Jesus, offering him up to God. It's God telling himself, his Son, you go down there and sacrifice yourself to me for their sins. So this is Jehovah making a sacrifice to himself. Do you understand that? The normal one is humans making a sacrifice to the gods. Gods give them something. This is Jehovah coming to the conclusion he's going to sacrifice something to himself, and then he's going to give something to humans that they didn't ask for and that they can't do anything about. See what I mean? I'm already confused. So, back to the text. So, do you see the discrepancy here? The sacrifice of Jesus is backwards. Here we have the Almighty Supreme Being Jehovah offering his own divine God Son to himself in order to do what? To gain favor from himself? To gain favor from men? The whole mechanics of how the Jesus sacrifice accomplishes its goal is unclear. At the very least, this convoluted sacrifice reveals a gross, fundamental misunderstanding of the whole purpose of traditional blood sacrifice. Blood-colored glasses. According to Christian dogma, the sacrifice of Jesus is necessary because God is unable to commune with mankind due to man's sinfulness. God is said to hate sin so much that when he looks at mankind, all God can see is man's sins. Since God hates sin, he therefore can't help but feel hatred toward mankind and want to destroy him in his anger. Christian lore states that God is perfect and human beings are imperfect and tarnished by the stain of sin. Therefore, God requires a blood sacrifice in order to wash away the stain of human sinfulness. See what I mean? So he's created this whole scenario. He created humans in his own image, and yet they're imperfect, and they screw up, and so he must punish them, and therefore then he requires a blood sacrifice. But humans aren't capable of giving a blood sacrifice good enough. So he offers his own son. Do you see what I mean? He's requiring a blood sacrifice, and then he's going to sacrifice to himself. It's very narcissistic. The whole thing is just Jehovah's narcissism from beginning to end. All right, so let me back up, start again. Christian lore states that God is perfect and human beings are imperfect and tarnished by the stain of sin. Therefore, God requires a blood sacrifice in order to wash away the stain of human sinfulness. Christian dogma states that Jehovah blinds himself to man's sinfulness by covering man's sin with the pure, sinless blood of his Son Jesus. When Jesus sheds his blood on the cross, this blood is used by Jehovah to cover man's sins so that Jehovah won't see his sin, but only Jesus' perfection. As I sit here and I read this again, this is Jehovah's denial. He doesn't actually get rid of the sin. He just covers it over so he won't see it. Even though, there are verses that say, washes away sin, but it's also very clear that Jehovah needs this. He needs this filter of Jesus' blood in order to look at humans. Otherwise, he just gets so furious he can't help but destroy them. It's denial. It's not forgiveness at all. And I know, because I was a Christian for many years, and I can tell you within that community, Christians are full of guilt all the time. And, that's the tears that they have in their eyes when they're thanking Jesus. It's the guilt, the continuous guilt that never goes away. That's my experience. Anyway, go back to the text. God's anger towards sin is pacified by the slaughter of his innocent Son. Christians are taught that during a brief moment during the crucifixion where the sun darkens and the earth shakes, God pours out all of his anger for every sin ever committed and every sin that will ever be committed onto his innocent Son. Then his anger is appeased and God feels better and can forgive mankind. Just think about that for a while. By looking through blood-colored glasses, Jehovah can look upon his own creation without being uncontrollably seized by anxiety and anger that apparently normally occurs when Jehovah is forced to view imperfection of any kind. Again, let me just reemphasize. Human beings are God's creation. He's furious. He's got to be furious with himself because the imperfect creation is his own. How can he not be angry at himself for his own inadequacy there? I mean, if this were a human being, that would be the logical conclusion. This sacrifice, back to the text now, this sacrifice to atone for sins is supposedly an extension of the Old Testament Hebrew blood sacrifice where an animal without blemish is slaughtered for the forgiveness of unintentional sin. This type of Hebrew sacrifice for the atonement of sins is recognized even by Jewish scholars as being in contrast with the type of sacrifices practiced by other traditional religions that utilized blood animal sacrifices for the purpose of gaining favor from the gods. It is my belief that the Jewish forgiveness sacrifice was invented by the Jewish priesthood during the Babylonian captivity in 597 BCE and does not represent traditional tribal Hebrew polytheist sacrifices for blessings. More on that later. Again, let me just say that is my belief. I'm okay being wrong about that. None of that takes away the rest of the inconsistency of Jesus' sacrifice. Bear in mind, there is a difference, and I want to make a difference between whatever the traditional monotheist Hebrew religion is that we know as Judaism. There's a difference between that and this Roman, supposedly, Hebrew religion of Jesus. There's a difference. That's why it didn't take with the Jews. The Jews didn't take it. They didn't accept it because it was like, it didn't make sense, and only, if you're not Jewish, maybe you can't see it, but somebody who's steeped in the Jewish religion is going to go, this isn't ours. That's why it didn't take. And again, I'm going to make the argument, the whole idea of this religion about Jesus was really about pacifying the Jewish rebels. It was like a psyop that the Romans did to try and pacify this really pesky rebellion that was going on. Anyway, back to the text. Missing the mark. The original Hebrew word for sin is literally translated as missing the mark. So even in traditional Hebrew understanding, sin does not imply evil actions worthy of punishment. It merely implies innocent, unintentional imperfection of any kind. If we analyze the symbolism in the word sin, we see the human being compared to an archer who is intending to, sorry, I'm distracted by my text. Please forgive me. Let me turn that off for just a moment. If we analyze the symbolism in the word sin, we see the human being compared to an archer who is intending to hit the target but unintentionally misses the mark. The idea is that with practice, the archer will eventually be able to hit the unintended target. By extension, it is presumed that humans will also be able to hit their target of being a righteous person with continued practice. This unintentional missing of the mark is in contrast to someone who is intentionally choosing to disobey or cause harm by their actions. Therefore, according to Christians, the Almighty Creator of all life is incapable of accepting anything other than total perfection. God is even unable to accept unintentional mistakes from His own creation, His own children, who are trying to hit the mark but make innocent mistakes as they learn and grow. The obsessive inability to accept imperfection in one's own children would be seen as a psychological neurosis if Jehovah were a human. Yet supposedly, for Jehovah, the Almighty, one and only Creator, this perfectionistic inability to accept imperfections of His own creation does not reveal a fundamental personality flaw as it would if it were found in a human. Instead, this inability to tolerate mistakes is supposed to underscore God's divine perfection. From a psychological perspective, Jehovah is clearly suffering from narcissistic pseudo-perfectionism. Narcissists often are this is a quote now, I'm quoting from Wikipedia as it so happens. Quote, narcissists are often pseudo-perfectionists and require being the center of attention and create situations where they will receive attention. This attempt at being perfect is cohesive with the narcissist's grandiose self-image. If a perceived state of perfection isn't reached, it can lead to guilt, shame, anger, or anxiety because she, the narcissist, believes that he or she will lose the imagined love and admiration from other people if he or she is not perfect. Let's read that again, shall we? This is a quote. Again, I admit I'm taking it from Wikipedia. Um, this is describing a psychological diagnosis that is called narcissist pseudo-perfectionism. Narcissists often are pseudo-perfectionists and require being the center of attention and create situations where they will receive attention. This attempt at being perfect is cohesive with the narcissist's grandiose self-image. If a perceived state of perfection isn't reached, it can lead to guilt, shame, anger, or anxiety, because the narcissist believes that he or she will lose the imagined love and admiration from other people if he or she is not perfect. What jumps out at me there is that they will create situations where they will receive attention. This is exactly what Jehovah does. This is me talking off script now. Jehovah, who creates human beings out of his perfection, and they are imperfect, and they apparently forget him and walk away from him, which if you're a narcissist, that's intolerable. You can't walk away from me. Then they create a situation where they will gain attention. So they create a situation where they sacrifice to themselves and then demand adoration from it. This is what Jehovah is doing. I'm not making this up. This is coming straight out of the religion of Christianity. And, again, as a Christian, we're taught, you can't try and figure out God. God is beyond our understanding, which is a really convenient excuse if God acts in really destructive, insane ways that if a human were to do the same thing, we'd lock them up and perhaps execute them. But it's okay for God to do it because he's God. That's it. End of story. That's the exact thing a narcissist would say. Moving on. Back to the text. Jehovah's demands of perfection on his creation is a projection of his own narcissistic demands of perfection upon himself, about which he clearly feels deep insecurity. Actually, as a narcissist, he doesn't really care if he is perfect or not. He just wants to be seen as being perfect. And anything or anyone that gets in the way of him being perceived as such causes Jehovah great anger. For God to be seen as even slightly imperfect makes him so angry that he is willing to permanently cast out anyone who makes him look bad by their own unintentional mistakes into everlasting punishment. Bear in mind, God doesn't just destroy these unwitting evildoers, he keeps them alive in eternal torment, ever aware of their mistakes. For Christians, hell is a place where humans are made painfully aware of exactly how they offended Jehovah. In hell, they are made aware of every single solitary offense ever committed. They are forced to relive and be punished for each offense forever. I mean, it's not like he's up there and you screwed up and he's going to punish you or wipe you out of existence. As awful and extreme as that is, he doesn't do that. He keeps you alive forever in torment. Forever. And all you have to do is make just one mistake. If you're a born-again Christian, if you were a born-again Christian, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This was hammered into you. Every single solitary mistake, that could be just the slightest misunderstanding. Because ultimately that's what sends everybody to hell from a Christian perspective. You didn't recognize Jesus. You worshiped somebody else. You didn't understand that Jesus was God and died for your sins. That is all you need. If you just that one mistake is enough to keep you in hell forever. And Jesus supposedly died to forgive everybody, but somehow the forgiveness doesn't take. You hear all the just the craziness of all this? It's very confusing. Back to the text. An interesting side note is that the word hell was hijacked by Christians from the pre-Christian Germanic word hell. Originally, hell was not a place of everlasting torment. It was the underworld where souls of the deceased who had not ascended to Valhalla, the hall of the chosen, would go to await rebirth. Hell was in many instances a place of feasting and merriment. But since hell was such an ingrained part of traditional European mindset, Christians appropriated, to be more specific, Anglo-Saxon Christians, appropriated the same exact word and changed its traditional meaning to describe the Christian underworld of eternal punishment. Original sin. In Christian doctrine, man is said to be born in sin, which means his fundamental nature is sinful. It doesn't matter whether he chooses to sin or wishes to be good. He cannot avoid being sinful in essence and in action. Simply because his ancestors, Adam and Eve, made the choice to know the difference between good and evil, which for some unknown reason is a bad thing, all humans subsequently are therefore stained with that original sin and are held accountable for it. So I've said this before, but you're not even allowed when you come into this world. You're not even allowed to be an innocent, pure child. Now, I know there are some doctrines within Christianity that, up till a certain point, but there's nothing in the New Testament text that says that infants are somehow spared this. You are already, the moment you are conceived, forget about being born, the moment that you are conceived, you are already damaged goods. You are already broken and worthy of destruction, not because of anything you did, but because Adam and Eve, they didn't kill each other. They didn't, they just wanted to know who they were. That's it. And Jehovah says to them, I'm putting this fruit tree in the garden, but you can't eat it. It's a fruit that if you eat it, you will know the difference between good and evil and you will become like me. And it's that one right over there. I mean, that one? Yeah, that one right over there. See that one? Yeah, that's the one. Don't eat that one. It'll make you like me. Okay, I'm going to go for a walk. Whatever you do, don't eat that fruit right over there, the one right there that will make you like me. Don't eat that one. Okay, I'll be right back. For that reason and for that reason only, you are damned. There's nothing you can do about it. Simply because his ancestors, Adam and Eve, made the choice to know the difference between good and evil, which for some unknown reason is a bad thing, all humans subsequently are therefore stained with that original sin and are held accountable for it. Back to the text. Perfectionism in worship. This type of hyper-perfectionism in worship is unique to monotheism. Traditionally, the gods are not seen as constantly demanding perfection. Their infrequent anger is more representative of natural states of imbalance where natural forces are seeking to achieve a state of equilibrium. But in monotheism, it is the Almighty who is at odds with himself. He has created these imperfect humans whom he must punish. But if he punishes them, then he is admitting to his own limited imperfection when he created them. So no matter what he does, if he forgives them or if he punishes them, he loses face and must admit to his own imperfection. To resolve this dilemma, God performs a blood sacrifice to himself in an attempt to achieve equilibrium in himself. It's like an insane person sitting around talking to himself. Everybody's watching. What is Jehovah doing? Oh, he's sacrificing that guy to himself because it's just him doing it for himself. Back to the text. To resolve this dilemma, God performs a blood sacrifice to himself in an attempt to achieve equilibrium in himself. But the harmony which should have resulted from his sacrifice of his son to himself doesn't quite take. He still must send the majority of his children, whom he already forgave, into hell for eternal punishment. Quote, many are called, but few are chosen, unquote. Mankind is told they are born in sin, and mankind is incapable of removing that sinfulness. Yet God must hold man completely responsible for his unintentional sins. Christians are told that even though they cannot choose to erase their own sin that they inherited, they are still given the gift of free will. Let me say that again. Christians are told that even though they cannot choose to erase their own sin that they inherited and are powerless to be free of, they are still given the gift of free will. So in other words, Jehovah's like, listen, you're going to disobey. It's impossible for you not to. That's your nature. And that's a sin. And I am going to hold you responsible for every sin because you as though you had the ability to do something different, but you can't. So you have to come to me for forgiveness. But, you see, it's so insane. Christians are told that even though they cannot choose to erase their own sin that they inherited, they are still given the gift of free will. Gee, thanks. So even though they can't help being sinners, they are still held accountable for their sins, and they are told that they do not have the choice but to sin, and simultaneously they are told that they do have free will and could have chosen not to sin, but did so anyway. Jesus, we are told, is the only human who had the purity of heart to resist the temptation to sin. But he wasn't just any human, he was divine also. Since he was born of a virgin who was impregnated by God, and he escaped inheriting human sinful nature. I didn't read that correctly. Let me try that again. Jesus, we are told, is the only human who had the purity of heart to resist the temptation to sin. But he wasn't just any human, he was divine also. Since he was born of a virgin who was impregnated by God, since he was born of a virgin who was impregnated by God, and he escaped inheriting human sinful nature. All right, so that's why he's different. So even I can't read my writing sometimes. Back to the text. So Jesus cheats a little, but for some reason that is okay with Jehovah. Meaning he cheats because he's not human. He's not human. He's only half human. He's like a Vulcan. He's only half human. The other half is divine, but that divine part takes over everything else. Now he's given free will as well, but because he's divine, he has the ability to overcome all of his temptations. So as great as that is, that doesn't really do us any good. But it's like, can you see the cruelty? It's just such psychological torture. Jehovah sets it up and says, listen, you're sinful. You can't do anything about it. You're born that way. I'm going to hold you responsible for all of your sins. Even though you don't have the free will to change the fact that you're sinful, I'm going to give you free will, but you won't have the capacity to use it, but I'm going to hold you accountable for it anyway. And just to prove to you how horrible and screwed up you are about this whole free will thing and all that, I'm going to create a human, but he's not going to be fully human. He's going to be my seed. So I'm going to rape one of my own children, and I'm going to have her become pregnant, and then he's going to be half me, and he's going to be fully me, and then he's going to be able to resist all temptation, and you should feel really guilty about that because he's doing what I really want you to do, even though I've set it up that you can't do it that way. All right, go. That's just, how could you not go crazy? There are people out there who are nominal Christians who they really don't understand what the religion is about. They're still being affected by it, but they can just go on with their life and, have affairs and go gamble and take drugs and then go to church. And it's just like, oh yeah, God forgives me. They don't really think about it all that much. But for people who take this seriously, like born-again Christians, if you've ever spent time in a born-again Christian church, like go to a really serious born-again Christian church and just hang around and talk to the people. You'll see people that are 25 years old that have bags under their eyes that are more intense than mine, and I'm 56. And I can remember being in my 20s and just knowing friends that just had these bags under their eyes like this, and they had this look on their face all the time. Praise the Lord. That's from just living in that toxic, crazy-making environment. All right, let's keep going. So Jesus cheats a little, but for some reason that is okay with Jehovah. The game is rigged, to quote Donald Trump. The game is rigged. There is no way to win. Man's only hope of forgiveness is to choose to accept the validity of Jesus' sacrifice for them. If man does not choose to believe in the sacrifice, it somehow loses its efficacy. So in other words, Jesus goes and with his divine power wipes out sin for everybody, but it doesn't take unless you acknowledge it. That's not forgiveness. That's not how forgiveness works. Forgiveness means you forgive somebody in your heart whether they acknowledge it or not. That is not forgiveness. Back to the text. If one chooses not to believe in the Jesus story and accept him as his Savior, then he has rejected Jehovah's gift of forgiveness. Apparently, all sins can be forgiven except the one that disrespects Jehovah the most. Reminds me of a store owner refusing to pay protection money to the mob. So in this case, Jehovah is like the mob. If something would have happened, you pay a little protection money, and then somebody doesn't come along and throw a bomb in your window, which would be me. So you're paying God protection money so that he doesn't throw you into hell. Am I wrong? That's exactly what he's doing. Back to the text. Jesus' reluctant self-sacrifice. Jehovah devises a plan to redeem his own perfect reputation and simultaneously save mankind from his punishment. God's plan is to volunteer his own son as a sacrifice to himself. Jesus does not volunteer. He is commanded to volunteer to be sacrificed by his Father. The Gospels are clear that Jesus did not want to be crucified. Later, he chooses to obey his Father, but the fact that it is not his own idea, and he has serious doubts about sacrificing himself, sort of, in my opinion, invalidates the selfless aspect of it all. It doesn't sort of invalidate it, it totally invalidates it. Compare Jesus' hesitance to be sacrificed with the complete commitment of other deities in animist mythology who willingly sacrificed themselves for mankind. Prometheus gave humans the gift of fire. He also taught men how to save the best portion of animal sacrifices so they could eat it afterward. For these gifts to man, Zeus had Prometheus bound to a mountain where his liver was eaten each day by an eagle. But even Prometheus is not punished eternally. He is eventually freed by Hercules. So too was Odin's self-sacrifice on the tree of life, completely voluntary without any hesitancy whatsoever. Compared with just these two traditional polytheist examples of deities sacrificing themselves for mankind, Jesus' reluctance to be sacrificed looks rather pathetic. Sacrificial flow of energy. The flow of energy in a traditional sacrifice is upward. By this I mean that spiritual energy contained in the blood is meant to flow upward to the higher powers who then transform this energy to then enable the descent of spiritual power down to earth, which can be used by men to augment their admitted lack of power. Jehovah's sacrifice of Jesus does not follow this law of spiritual energy dynamics. The Jesus sacrifice creates a confused, chaotic flow of energy. Jehovah, in essence, steals the life force of his own son in order to empower himself to be able to forgive the limitations of his own creations, who must then repay his free gift of salvation with perpetual gratitude and unwavering devotion. Whereas the normal flow of life force energy in traditional sacrifices is from earth to heaven and back down to earth, the flow of the Jesus sacrifice is from heaven to Jesus to heaven to earth to heaven again. Question mark, question mark. The supposed mechanics of this sacrifice just doesn't follow any logic or common sense, whether that be of a spiritual or practical nature. From the perspective of a shaman animist who seeks to find a dynamic balance of energy, The sacrifice of Jesus would create a chaotic flow of life force energy that would result in further imbalance rather than a healing dynamic balance between men and gods. And indeed, in my own personal experience with Christianity, this is exactly what does happen within the heart and mind of the Christian worshiper. The origin of the Jesus myth. In my opinion, the Jesus sacrifice does not work simply because, unlike the animist alternative, it is not a myth created to solve a practical human survival problem. I've talked about this in other books, but shamanism, which is another word for animism, which polytheism is, an offshoot of animism, it is always designed to solve a practical, real-life, flesh and blood survival problem. Worshipping the god of thunder, worshipping the rains, worshipping the Mother Earth is all about staying alive. It's practical. If it doesn't work, people die. The Jesus myth doesn't have any practical human survival. It's all about the next world. And in my experience, it makes life very uncomfortable. Continuing with the text. The Jesus myth is a product of the minds of Roman imperial politicians seeking a way to artificially impose the blood sacrifice mythology onto a political power play. Historical authenticity of Jesus. This book is not meant to be an exhaustive thesis on the historicity or lack thereof of the biblical Jesus. I leave it to the reader. Do your research. I leave it to the reader to do their own due diligence on this subject. Besides, I have learned through experience that devout Christians are not interested in objective evidence if such evidence contradicts their beliefs. That's also true with pretty much anybody who's got an emotional agenda. That's why I don't even bother, really trying to argue some things, because if you've got an emotional attachment to it, it's just a waste of time. I can show you all the proof in the world and it won't matter to you. Having been a zealously devout Christian myself in my youth, I understand this mindset and also accept the futility of any attempt to persuade Christians to objectively examine any such evidence. Having said that, there is zero, and I mean zero, objective, conclusive evidence of any kind that a man named Jesus of Nazareth ever existed. In fact, even the slightest attempt to objectively prove the existence of Jesus during the years 0 to 33 CE will reveal absolutely nothing. That is not my opinion, that is merely a fact. But the lack of evidence does not disprove his existence. So, I submit to you what is to me the most convincing objective historical evidence that the biblical Jesus of Nazareth did not ever exist. That evidence is concerned with the supposed town where Jesus is presumed to have grown up, the town of Nazareth. Now, what I'm saying in this is that if somebody wants to, like if you want to look through the historical record outside of the Bible, outside of the New Testament, for contemporary historical evidence of Jesus, you will not find it. You will find in, I think it's Josephus, you will find mentions of various people named Jesus, but nothing about what they are referred to being connected to has anything to do with the Jesus of Nazareth. And nothing. I mean, it's like really, like prisoners, and some guy did this and some guy said that. It can't be used that way. And in fact, if you want to find on a historical level at that time that Jesus supposedly existed, somebody referring to a teacher named Jesus walking around, you won't find it. It doesn't exist. So the point is that I'm saying that historical evidence is there for anybody who looks for it, that there's just this big emptiness. You can't find Jesus anywhere. And as much as, I find that interesting, I didn't want to use that. What I'm saying is I found one bit of evidence that conclusively proves that Jesus of Nazareth never existed. In fact, it proves that it is impossible that he could have existed. And that is the evidence I'm about to share with you now. Back to the text. The problem of Nazareth. I just want to see how many people are watching. Okay, 13. The problem of Nazareth. The evidence that definitively disproves the authenticity of the Gospels is the fact that the town of Nazareth, where Jesus supposedly spent his childhood, did not even exist in any form until at least 100 years after his supposed death and resurrection. It could even be as much as 200 years. Moreover, a town called Nazareth is nowhere to be found in the Hebrew Old Testament nor in any other historical document until long after Jesus' supposed death. The city of Nazareth was a real city, but not during the supposed life of Jesus. Nazareth was founded sometime after 135 AD by a group of Nazarite, Jewish ascetic, refugees. The Gospels were written sometime after the founding of Nazareth. The Nazarite, now that by the way is not under, that is, everybody accepts that. Even Christians accept that the Gospels were written long after Jesus' supposed death, or compiled, or whatever. And during that time that it was written down, Nazareth did in fact exist. That's important. The Gospels were written sometime after the founding of Nazareth. The Nazarites were an ascetic Jewish sect closely affiliated with the Messianic movement and rebellion against Rome. Since it was well known during the writing of the Gospels that Jewish ascetics lived in Nazareth, this made this town a poetic setting for the writers of the Gospels to present their fictional hero as having grown up there. In other words, they were looking for somebody that they could use to appeal to the Messianic rebels. And so Nazareth was a place where the Messianic rebels would have looked upon as a wonderful place. It would have been like, somebody in the Islamic world, somebody being born in Mecca. It would have been this really great, he came from the center of our rebellion. He must be a good person, right? And in fact, I believe Jesus was identified in the Gospels as a Nazarite. All right, since it was well known during the writing of the Gospels that Jewish ascetics lived in Nazareth, this made this town a poetic, symbolic setting for the writers of the Gospels to present their fictional hero as having grown up there. The archaeological and historical facts concerning the founding of Nazareth makes the historical authenticity of the Gospels simply impossible. The Gospels are fiction, pure and simple. Jesus is a fictional character. If, as the fundamentalists would have us believe, the Christian Gospels are literal, accurate historical accounts, then the question of Nazareth poses a huge problem for the literal existence of Jesus. The Gospels are absolutely and unmistakably incorrect when they assert that the city of Nazareth existed during the years 0 to 33 AD. If that one fundamental aspect of the supposed historical account of Jesus is completely wrong, then how can any of it be trusted to be historically accurate? Point being, if you're a Christian, you believe that the Bible, including the New Testament, is the literal, inerrant Word of God. That is one of the main arguments that Christians use. So if there's a huge, glaring historical inaccuracy talking about the main character, then the whole religion falls on its face. And it falls on its face because Christians have put themselves into that corner. Now, if they wanted it to be symbolic, then they'd be okay. Then they could talk about Jesus all they want, and this isn't a literal thing, it's here to teach something, which is what mythology says. But Christianity is trying to rise above and to compete with and defeat mythology, and so they have to have this talking point of, but this is literal history. So that in itself makes it completely, and this destroys every single argument. So even people who aren't fundamentalist Christians, who aren't literalists, if they want to talk about, well, Jesus really existed and this and that, but the problem is that your authoritative text, even if it's symbolic, is presenting itself as literal history. So you can't do that. The whole thing comes crumbling down. just from this one. And this is just one. Like I said earlier, if I wanted to, and I had the time and the expertise, we could be here for days talking about all the ways that this is impossible. I just picked the one, that if you pull this one, Jenga out, the whole thing comes falling down. And that's Jesus could not have existed because Nazareth didn't exist. Back to the text. We're not talking about an insignificant detail that we could easily overlook. We're talking about a fundamental pillar of the Jesus story that could not have happened at all. For me, every other valid and persuasive argument against the literal existence of Jesus, which are beyond counting, are unnecessary. The New Testament Gospels are unmistakably clear. They are written about the life and ministry of a man who lived from the years 0 to 33 AD, named Jesus of Nazareth, who grew up in the town of Nazareth in Roman-occupied Palestine. The fact that this town did not exist until around the time that the Gospels were first written down, 100 plus years after his death, makes it very clear to me that the Christian Gospels are first century fiction, most probably written by Romans, not Jews. I have for some time now strongly suspected, as you probably have, that the Christian Gospels were the invention of the Roman imperial machine in order to use religion to control a very large and unruly empire. Purpose of the Gospels. So let me see, is that a new? Yeah, who cares? Let's keep going. Purpose of the Gospels. The original intent of the Gospel seems to have been to pacify the very troublesome Jewish rebels who followed a revolutionary messianic form of Judaism. The Romans very artfully studied the tenets of this messianic movement as well as the prophecies concerning the Jewish Messiah recorded in the Torah. Roman nobility, in an attempt to prevent the loss of precious time and resources militarily quelling a very stubborn religious rebellion, sought to create a fictional pacifist Jewish Messiah who could teach the rebellious Jews to turn the other cheek and give unto God what is God's and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Sorry, there's somebody outside my driveway there. Anyway, moving on. The verse about giving to Caesar is an important verse because it specifically addresses one of the main flashpoints of the Messianic Jewish rebellion. The Jewish rebels were quite vociferous about not paying Roman taxes. To do so was considered blasphemous to Jewish extremists. It is no coincidence, therefore, that Jesus tells his people to pay up. The idea of obeying the Roman government was also a major theme in the New Testament epistles. In the 13th chapter of the Epistle to the Romans, Paul advises, quote, "Let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities," the Roman elite. "For there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore he who resists," Roman authority, hang on. Interesting. That was some Christian guy dropping off food to the wrong address. Interesting. All right, so forgive me for that. Let's go back. So, the idea of obeying the Roman government was also a major theme in the New Testament epistles. In the 13th chapter of the Epistle to the Romans, Paul advises, "Let every person be in subjection to the governing Roman authorities." I put that in there. "Let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities," Roman elite at that time. "For there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore he who resists," Roman authority at that time of the writing, "therefore he who resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Wherefore, it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. So now, when you're a Christian and you're born and you read you're born into this religion and you're reading it, blah, 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 what ends up happening is that oh yeah, this is just what God wants. But you have to understand when this was written. This was written during a time of a massive rebellion by the Jewish people, and the things that got them so angry enough to fight and kill, was being forced to pay taxes to a foreign government. And here, Paul, again, very conveniently, a Jewish, conservative Jewish priest or whatever he was before he converted, supposedly, he is saying not only do you have to give them taxes, but you should give them your fear. Do whatever the hell they tell you to do, because God put them there. And he says very clearly, if you don't follow their rules, you will be condemned by God. In other words, you can go to hell for rebelling against any kind of authority. What I find really ironic about all this is that, born-again fundamentalist Christians will go on and on and on about how they hate government and they hate authority, and everybody should have their own gun and freedom of speech and all of that. But the Bible that they worship, where they get their information, is telling them not to do any of that. And again, it's telling you to just be a pacifist. Listen, just don't worry about any of that stuff. Just love each other. That is talking to the Jews, the angry Jews who wanted to fight against a foreign invader. And he's saying, God says, just love each other. Be loving to them. Turn the other cheek. You have to understand this in order to look at what the New Testament was really all about. And then when you look at it, it becomes really, really just insidious. It's a psyop. It's propaganda. All right, back to the text. The Jews of the day didn't buy into this new version of pacifist Judaism the way the Roman elite had hoped for, but coincidentally, Christianity started taking hold with other non-Jewish people within the Roman Empire. Eventually, the Roman general Constantine realized that he could use Christianity to great effect in his bid to become the next Roman emperor. All right, so I'm going to briefly stop there for a second because I want to see how far I am in this and how much time, how many people, if there are any questions. So let me see. I've gone through in the first two, this one and the previous one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so I've gone through 8. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's go one more. Let's do one more chapter, and then we'll keep going. So, Constantine becomes emperor through Christ, page 51 in my PDF, page 51. Which, of course, the may be different in whatever form of this book you have. All right. Constantine becomes emperor through Christ. Constantine I was emperor of Rome from 306 to 337 AD. Constantine secured his title of Caesar when he defeated the Roman emperor Maxentius, who was also a political rival claiming the title of Caesar. In the final battle against Maxentius in 312 AD, Constantine emerged victorious as Caesar of Rome. Conquer through this. Constantine was eager to consolidate his rule over Rome, but there was another claimant to the throne named Maxentius, whose military forces controlled much of the Italian peninsula. Constantine, eager to defeat Maxentius and take the title of Caesar, was advised against attacking Maxentius by his generals, advisors, and even his pagan soothsayers. He was a pagan. Even his pagan soothsayers, who claimed that sacrifices had indicated Constantine would lose to Maxentius's larger military forces. Constantine ignored all of these warnings and proceeded to cross the Alps into northern Italy. From the spring of 312 to October of that same year, Constantine's forces advanced toward Rome, defeating all of Maxentius's forces that he encountered. According to various accounts, during his march toward Rome, Constantine had a vision of the symbol of the cross. He supposedly had a dream the next night wherein Christ told him to conquer by the means of the sign of the cross. On October 28, 312, Maxentius's forces met Constantine's army at the Milvian Bridge outside of Rome, where Maxentius's forces were quickly defeated and Maxentius was killed during an attempted retreat. Constantine rode into Rome that same day, where he was hailed as a liberator by jubilant Roman citizens. He was declared Caesar of Rome shortly thereafter. I'm just going to back up because I want to see when was this? 306. Okay, so 312. So 300 years after Jesus' supposed crucifixion. All right, let's continue. Constantine the opportunist. Constantine was, by all accounts, rather uneducated. Prior to his conversion, he had been a pagan sun worshipper. Since he had been advised against attacking Maxentius by his own advisors, generals, and pagan advisors, it is noteworthy to observe that Constantine continued his military campaign against Maxentius anyway. It seems from his own account that Constantine was not so religious that he wasn't above disobeying the gods. A cynical person might conclude that Constantine was simply a headstrong, power-hungry general who was not religious but simply opportunistic in his allegiances. We cannot say for certain whether or not Constantine's conversion to Christianity was a heartfelt experience or if it was simply an act of determined politician seeking some kind of religious authority to his rule. Hey, if the sun god won't back me, maybe this Jesus fellow will. After securing his political dominion, Constantine legalized the Christian religion and began persecuting traditional pagan religions. He banned pagan sacrifice and sacked pagan temples and donated their riches to Christian churches. While Christianity did not legally become the official religion of Rome until 380 under the rule of Theodosius, Constantine's support of Christianity effectively began to complete the destruction of traditional animism in the Western world. It's really important. That's when that was the Jenga piece that started the whole thing. One size fits all. By the time of Constantine's rule, some 200 years after the writing of the Gospels, the Roman Empire was long overdue for a state religion that would unify all the disparate cultures and religions within its borders. Long before the advent of monotheism in Rome, the Roman Empire would justify its conquest of other cultures with the propaganda that it was bringing the light of civilization to a dark and backward primitive world. But this vast and growing empire of non-Romans created somewhat of a problem. As the Roman Empire grew, more and more foreign religions were tolerated within the empire. As Rome sought to gobble up the entire known world unto itself, it became harder and harder to unify such a diverse religious and cultural landscape. As demonstrated within the Messianic Jewish rebels, religion itself was a powerful tool for any would-be malcontents to motivate populations to rebel against Roman authority. Since Rome saw herself as the one true civilization, it was only a matter of time before she invented a one-size-fits-all religion with which she could control all of her subjects. Christianity, while initially invented to solve the rebel Jewish problem, was a ready-made tool for increased control over the entire empire. Enter would-be Roman Emperor Constantine. One can easily see the usefulness of a monotheist religion to create a monocultural empire. Better yet, why not completely exclusive monotheist religion? Better yet, a religion that is so exclusive that anyone who rejects it will be eternally imprisoned and tortured for their blasphemy. In recent years, more and more historical evidence has come forth that supports the idea concerning the Roman origins of monotheist Christianity. For those wanting a more thorough historical examination of the Roman invention of Christianity, I direct you to the works of Joseph Atwell. Another great resource for the mythological well upon which the Jesus myth is drawn is found in the first half of the film Zeitgeist the Movie. Second half of the movie is a bunch of conspiracy theory stuff that is not relevant to this subject. So Google either of those resources and you will find a plethora of readily available info on the subject of the mythological origins of the Jesus myth. However, Christianity did not invent modern monotheism, it only built upon it. In my personal opinion, monotheism is the single most destructive force ever unleashed upon the planet. Let me repeat that. In my personal opinion, monotheism is the single most destructive force ever unleashed upon the planet. The big three religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are responsible for a monumental shift in human thinking that is unrivaled in the history of human existence. During the previous 98,000 years of modern human existence before Christianity, and perhaps even before that, humans evolved as animists. Monotheism changed the course of human evolution and as a result, changed the course of history, not just for human civilization, but for all life on planet Earth. All right, and with a statement of that magnitude, I will go ahead and stop the reading here. We'll check and see if there are any viewers. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. It doesn't look like there are any. We only got 17 people on. Adam Khan, are you talking to me? You talking to me? Is Homie still in New Zealand and Australia? I am still in Australia. In fact, I've been very perturbed and worried the past couple of days because normally what happens, I'm too old to immigrate here unless I marry somebody. There's no visa options for somebody who's over 45. I mean, there's none. There used to be all kinds of different ways that you could stay here for long periods, and there's none, even before all this COVID thing. But because I had a really great visa, which was an electronic tourist visa, I could get, they just hand them out to you like candy. They last for a year. You just have to leave the country every 3 months, which literally means going through customs and turning around and coming back in the country. You're perfectly fine. But if I do that now, I can't get back in because the borders are closed. I sure as hell am not going back to Los Angeles right now. No way. I've talked to people living there. They have to walk around with masks. They can't do anything. They're miserable. The beaches are closed. There's just no way in hell I'm going back there right now. And I don't know how long this is going to last, so I was really worried. But I just got off the phone before doing this. The reason why I waited so long to do it today is because I was desperately trying to talk to an immigration lawyer, find out what my options were. So it looks like that there is a pretty good option, and there's a good chance that I don't have to do anything, and I'll have to reapply for a new visa, but I may be able to keep doing what I'm doing. So hopefully this thing will calm down, and I'm starting to get to the point where I'm getting to think along the lines of a lot of you, whereas I think in the U.S. they should just let it go. I mean, it's going to, no doubt a lot of people will die, but this half and half where they're trying to contain it in parts of the country and they're not, it's just, that only keeps it, that's like the perfect scenario to keep the pandemic huge. So, I mean, I'm starting to think maybe they should just let it go. It's too late now. They're not going to be able to contain it. And, I talked to my sister who lives out in the country, and to her it's like, I don't know what's going on with this thing. She doesn't, it doesn't touch her. And yet, for those of you who think it's a hoax, and I know a lot of you do, like my sister, she doesn't think it's a hoax, but you live out in the middle of nowhere, and it doesn't touch you. You're only hearing about it through the news. If you already have a distrust of any news information, then you don't know it's real. Trust me, I'm talking with people. I'm Zooming with people who are in it. It is real. It's a real thing. But we're all coming to the same conclusion that this halfway trying to contain it and not contain it is actually the worst possible thing you can do. So anyway, don't, listen, that's just my take on it now. So yeah, I'm still here in Australia for the foreseeable future. Leslie Sava, and as I understand, he was a Roman citizen. Who? You have to be specific. If you guys are going to write questions, you got to write full sentences so I know what you're talking about. Who is he? Sounds like it's a good point. I want to buy into it with you, but I can't if you don't, write the whole thing so I know what you're talking about. Jeannie Griffin, question. Have you read Caesar's Messiah? Great read. He lays out that Paul is a Roman. I think I did. Been a while. I research. You guys get on my case for not researching. You have no idea how much stuff I research. I research so much stuff I can't keep it in my head. I listen to videos that I've done and I go, holy crap, I've got all this information. It just falls out of my head. I put so much stuff in there. Yeah, I could go off about you guys not researching, who claim to research. No more questions? All right. No more questions. All right, so that's it, guys. Yeah, the phone says it's time to go. So that's it. So remember, thunderwizard.com. Go there. You can subscribe at whatever level works for you. It helps keep this channel going. I want to be doing this. I want to be doing videos all the time. As I said, when I get to the place where I don't have to sell services and products in order to make a living, everything will be free. I'll spend all my time giving out all my information and all my teachings for free. I want to do that. So if you want to help in that, you can go to thunderwizard.com and subscribe at whatever level you want. There's multiple, and subscription isn't just you pay money. I mean, you get access to hundreds and hundreds of hours of in-depth video teachings that I don't put on the free channel. You can go to lockdown.thunderwizard.com. There are people that are buying things from, they're watching videos and they're buying the Immortal package or they're buying the Celestial Qigong. And every time I write them back and I say, hey, if you want, you should get the Lockdown package. It includes this for free. I'm giving away $3,214 worth of every single thing that I teach that I have direct control over. I'm giving it away for free. The only thing that you're paying for is 5 services that you get from me. $3,214. That is my gift to this lockdown. And it also helps me stay and keep doing these videos all the time. Courses.thunderwizard.com. That is my link for everything. If you have a question, where can I do this and how can I become an apprentice and how much does this cost, go to that and you'll find out a link to everything that I offer. Of course, subscribe and hit the bell button. Tell your friends, take these videos. If there's a specific video that really speaks to you, put it on your Facebook, your Instagram, your Facey page, your Who's He What's It, your Twiddly Dee Dum, whatever it is. Put it on there and get the word out. As you see here, I'm trying to get this channel 24/7, and I'm repeating stuff. I'm repeating, and interestingly enough, it's getting more people watching. So help me out, get the word out there. Here's what's happening now. I'm going to start moving in the direction of what gets the most watch time is what I'm going to focus on. If there are things that you want me to talk about, then help me out. Get those kinds of videos to get more views. In my belief, the best videos I have the least amount of views. That's not your fault. According to my astrology, my reputation is going to be based on being controversial. That's where people are going to notice me. So I'm going to be controversial. That's what gets me to be able to do what I want to do. When we get to that point that this channel is paying for itself, then I will, like I said, I'll release everything. I will talk about everything. And nobody ever has to pay for a thing when we get to that place. So help me with that. All right. That's the deal. I'll talk to you guys later on. Have a good one.